The Texaco Star Theater, usually presented at this time by the makers of Texaco gasoline over most of these stations, and Take It or Leave It, usually presented by the makers of Eversharp pens and pencils at 10 p.m. Eastern Wartime, will not be heard tonight due to the special broadcasts which follow immediately.
This November night, in the fourth autumn of the fight, the earth of 5 continents shakes to the tread of massed marching. The waters of every quadrant feel the knifing thrusts of sharp bows. The silent reaches of all the skies are troubled by the thunderous roar of planes. Millions of Americans everywhere are moving forward. Ahead, at the end of the road, in distance to be measured by faith and struggle and common action, is the goal toward which they move, shining with the brightness of the best hopes of good men since time began. This night, now, on paths that are bathed in blood and suffering for them and for all men, our loved ones are embarked on an American pilgrimage, a journey into freedom.
Good evening, this is Victor Jory speaking. Tonight, on the eve of the 6th Victory War Loan Drive, we cannot see their faces, hear their voices, grasp their hands, but we can go to them. We can go to them by going to the houses in which they lived, to their families and friends, to the America they last saw and knew. In the angle of a pennant tacked to the wall above an attic bed, and the smell of dry leaves burning in the backyard, a floral pattern on a cereal bowl, the high, squeaking sound of the front door as it swings open, in the old coat rack just inside that nobody ever uses. We will touch them again. Columbia Broadcasting System takes you now to the homes of the men who are away on the American pilgrimage, to the shores of the Pacific with Cecil B. DeMille, to the Atlantic coast and Manhattan with Burt Lytell, to the Lone Star State with Jim Crocker, to the hills of Utah with Gene Hirschholt, to a city in the Middle West, to Milton Bacon, and the Tuffers who live in an 8-room frame house on Saratoga Street in Cleveland, a house from which 3 sons have gone into the service.
Well, Mrs. Tupper, home must be a pretty empty place without Arthur and George and Herbert.
At first, it certainly was. But soon after they left, something happened that made it easier to fill the empty places at our table. 3 boys who lived outside Cleveland came into the city to do war work. They came to live with us, and for a while it seemed like old times. But soon 2 of them went into the service. The remaining boy has found himself a wife, and they still live with us.
But you still have 1 son at home, don't you? You're Jimmy, aren't you?
Yep. I'm only 14 now, but as soon as I'm old enough, you'll be seeing me in the Merchant Marine.
Well, we certainly hope that when that time comes, the war will be over and everybody will be back.
What branches are the boys in, Mr. Tupper?
Let's see. Aunt Junior's in the Navy, first-class petty officer in the Seabees. George is in the Navy, too, a coxswain of a landing barge. Herbert's in khaki. He's a sergeant stationed at a hospital somewhere in Britain. The 2 Navy boys are in the Pacific. As a matter of fact, we've just learned that George was in on the Philippine invasion. And somehow we've got a feeling that our Junior is on the way home now for a furlough.
Now, Arthur's the married boy, isn't he?
That's right. Here's his wife, Hilda.
It must give you a wonderful feeling, Hilda, to know your husband will be turning up any day now.
There's really no way of being sure about it. But anyway, I might as well admit I'm walking around with my head in the clouds, just on the basis of our hunch.
How long have you and Arthur been married?
2.5 years. Right now I'm living with my parents, but you can be sure we'll have a home of our own just as soon as Art comes back for good.
Well, let's hope that's soon.
We're all hoping that, Mr. Bacon. Meanwhile, there are always 1,000 little memories around the house. Whenever I go into this room or that room, something always comes to remind me of the connections with one or more of the children. I guess it's clear to you, though, that the most frequent reminders are the 3 pictures right here on the piano.
Yes, I had my eye on them a while back.
Of course, there's their own rooms, and every time I go into them, I think I can almost see my 3 boys. There were times when they were young, we wished they'd stop tearing up the house and finish the racket they kept making and give us older folk a little peace. But believe me, Mr. Bacon, there isn't anything I've got now or ever will have that I wouldn't give to have them here this minute to tear up the house again.
Well, there are many kinds of tearing up, Mrs. Tupper. The tearing up of spirited kids, of hide and seek, and catch me if you can. And then there's the tearing up of kids now grown to manhood. The tearing up of the rotten roots of fascism in battle, in blood, and in long struggle. To have the first again, there must be the second. And that's why tonight, Arthur, George, and Herbert, with all the millions of other American sons from homes like yours, are away on an American pilgrimage. Space is at its best in Texas. Land stretching on and on and on, almost forever. And a sky above is so vast and full of emptiness, a boy could almost burst inside, figuring out how far it went. To many a Texas kid who sat under a tree looking up, wondering at such simple things as distance in sky and far-off places, there has come an answer. An answer in action, in flight, in going out beyond the boundaries of endless childhood sky, across oceans, over mountains, far from the lone star. It may have started for one Texas boy on a summer afternoon long ago as he stretched out lazily on a small hill in Dallas and looked up into the sky over the roof of his home on Edmonton Street, where Jim Crocker is visiting now with the Paynes.
I have a feeling I'm speaking from America's living room. A room you might walk into in almost any town in America, warm and comfortable with the air of being lived in. And living in it tonight is the family of Captain Walter E. Payne of the Army Air Forces, a prisoner of war somewhere in Germany. The family circle spans a distance in years from his 96-year-old grandmother to a 10-month-old nephew. Mr. Payne, when did the news come that your son is a prisoner of war?
First news was on August 18th. His plane had been shut down over France, and he was missing in action.
How did the family take the news?
When the telegram came, Walter's mother was writing to one of his friends in the service. When I read it to her, she paused for a few seconds. We looked at each other. Then she said, "Well, nothing's happened to him. I would have known it if it had." And then she went right back to her letters.
Mother has always taken things more calmly than the rest of us as far back as I can remember.
You're Charlotte Reese, Walter's sister.
Yes, and this is my brother, Howard.
Mr. Crocker.
How do you do, sir?
And these are my children, Bill and Jack.
Hello. Now, one of you is too small to talk. But how about you? What's your name?
Jack Reese.
And tell me, Jack, do you ever think about your Uncle Walter?
Yes, but I'm not worried.
Oh, you're not?
No, he can take care of himself.
Jack's always been pretty proud of his Uncle Walter.
Mrs. Payne, in the light of what's happened, what particular things do you remember about Walter's childhood?
Well, as you probably gathered from Jack, Walter's always been pretty self-reliant. And he was crazy about mechanical things. He was always coming home with an old wheel or a motor or some other gadget he'd found. He kept the backyard looking like a junk pile. I remember the day he started going to high school. He set out in an automobile he'd put together himself.
But he got cold feet and brought it right back home. I guess he thought the older boys wouldn't stand for a freshman driving to high school the first day in his own car.
Have you heard from him since he's been a prisoner of war?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we had our first direct communication from him only a day or two ago. He didn't say much, just not to worry, and that he was all right.
Mother here seems to be worried a lot about whether he's getting enough to eat.
Howard, your mother gives the impression of being too busy to worry.
Yes, Mother and Dad, from the very beginning, have put many days in war service.
I understand that Walter was due to have a leave in this country about the time he was captured.
He was coming home to be married. His fiancée is here with us tonight. Blanche came down from Chicago for a visit with us.
How long have you and Walter been engaged, Blanche?
Over a year now, only it's never been formally announced. I've always felt like a member of the family, as Walter and I have known each other since our high school days.
Well, what kind of a boy was Walter in high school?
A super guy. I wasn't the only one who thought so. He was voted best all-around boy at North Dallas High in his senior year.
Well, tell me, Blanche, how's waiting? Pretty tough?
Well, it's not easy. Never is, I suppose. For one thing, there's no telling how long it will be. But whatever it is, believe me, it's worth the waiting.
How much of waiting, Blanche? How much of patient, quiet, determined waiting for the future? With people back in places belonging to them, how much of such waiting there is in all of America tonight cannot be added up. But easily and warmly in the total, you will find thoughts of sunny afternoons in America, of the touch of someone walking beside you again, speaking of things to come and plans and people everywhere, building once more. Somewhere in the broad reaches of the South Atlantic, 12 days out of New York, having left the Narrows early morning on September 9th, 2 years ago, a ship, its cargo and crew vanished from the face of the earth. No part of her, no man aboard her, no remnant of the weapons she carried has ever appeared on the surface of the broad ocean, nor been washed up on its shores. Officially, the records are closed. The episode finished. But that spot on the South Atlantic is not forgotten. For one American woman who lives in an apartment on 114th Street, Manhattan, where Bert Lytell is sitting with her right now, it has become, through lonely years of waiting, a symbol of faith and hope.
Mr. Lytell, this faith I've got can't be broken. I've been notified by the Navy Department, and here's the medal awarded to my husband long after the ship disappeared. Still, nobody can convince me Jim won't walk through that door again.
Is it a simple matter of faith, Mrs. Abernathy? Or is it something more?
It's more than faith. I'm a sailor's daughter, and I've known ships and the men that sailed them since my childhood in Queenstown, Ireland. Ships don't just disappear. There are always traces, wreckage or a last message, anticipating trouble. This time there was nothing. The ship's at war, almost anything can happen. I'm sure the full story remains to be told. I'm even surer I'm going to hear it from my husband, Jim.
Was Jim a seafaring man, or did he go to sea to fight the war?
Jim is a radio engineer, has been one most of his life. He left his job to enter the merchant marine as a radio man. He sailed out of New York as a radio man on the 9th of September,